Okay, so this topic area is the prototype manufacture and installation. This was added in the last round. So maybe for those of you that stepped away for a year from CIP, you would not have seen this. Please keep it in mind. This is an evolution of CIP listening to small wind turbine developers like those on the call and past participants, where there was a recognized need that manufacturing can be very cost prohibitive. So we looked at a way to support that step in the process of turbine development and certification. And that's really the scope of work here, is to support the prototype construction and possibly the installation. It does not have to include installation if that's just not where you're at in your workflow. It can just be exclusive to the prototype manufacture, and it's really for the full turbine system. I mean, all components, to arrive at a prototype that is ready for testing or even possibly ready for certification. Again, yep, as mentioned, installation is not necessarily required, but it is an option with this award type. There is there is an expectation here that you are coming to us with a completely new design, something that has not been well developed, well documented. Design specifications are expected to be completed. This is not a pre-prototype or a prototype design. This is a prototype that is well thought out, sound in engineering, and is ready for the manufacturing stage. So this does include support for purchasing of hardware, which can be a little bit different from some of the discussions we've had in the past. So it will include funding for actual purchases of turbine tower, power electronics, and it can include tooling. And then of course there's the labor costs that will be included in this award type. So the idea here is that this is a prototype, so there is not really an expected useful life afterwards, and that's where we can help support these kind of material costs that aren't necessarily considered consumable. There is a distinction here that we would like to be made in the proposal, whether or not this prototype is being manufactured for installation on a tower or ground-based installation, such as for dynamometer testing. We do prefer that distinction to be made at the proposal stage, because it can change, certainly change interfaces and some costs and things. So knowing that is helpful. There is some flexibility within CIP around this award type and the prototype testing award, the topic area 2. So this award type does not include any testing whatsoever. It is for manufacturing of the turbine, and if you choose so, or you're ready for that stage, installation. So think about whether or not this is the right award type, or if prototype testing is the award type, or think about how you could possibly couple both, or start with manufacturing and then move to prototype testing where installation is also covered, but it allows you to install and test. So just a caveat, something to think about. And then again, as with CIP in general, the expectation is that this is going to lead to an improved product, better, higher efficiency, better levelized cost of energy, and ultimately some certification around it for the US market. Quick rundown of the tasks here. There's the common first deliverable, the summary of work effort, which we use for communications development and letting the world know that you have an award with DOE under CIP and what is new and exciting about what's going to be done with the award. There's a design evaluation, which includes a go, no-go decision. And I'll talk more about that in another slide. The task 4.3, manufacturing and tooling plan. This is to describe, the who, what, when, where for the actual manufacture of the turbine. Then we have task 4.4, which is a document reporting all of the construction and assembly of the prototype turbine. And then if applicable, there's the 4.5 deliverable, which is the turbine installation. Again, this is another detailed report that documents the installation of the turbine. And the final task that closes out the award is the revised levelized cost of energy. And this would be the same as what was submitted with the proposal, but now based on everything that's been learned, over the length of the award, we want to see how the LCOE has changed, whether good or bad. Hopefully good, but that's the intent here. Design evaluation, go, no go. So this is a technical design evaluation. This is meant to be very much consistent with what would be required for certification purposes. So everything needs to be sound and grounded in reality, physics-based, sound engineering, no kind of back of the envelope type of stuff will be acceptable here. Based on this evaluation, as mentioned, there's a go, no go. The go is the continuation of those tasks that was listed. A no-go would result in contract termination. The intent is really to assess the readiness of the machine, the maturity of the design, and to ensure that there is a strong likelihood that this prototype will reach certification and recertification testing and ultimately become a mass-produced manufactured product. So as mentioned, loads are critical here. This is I know we talk a lot about loads in CIP, but it really is a strong foundation for assessing the readiness of a turbine. So we are going to be looking for loads that are consistent with certification purposes. It can include measurements. We've seen in the past maybe some measurements at scale or a pre-prototype, and that can be acceptable. But again, we need really solid documentation of what was done, how it was done, and we do request some analytical estimations of the loads that would go along with that. This offering is configuration agnostic, so it doesn't really matter what turbine type or archetype is, but we do need a loads table that is consistent, and the NREL team can be confident that it is based on sound engineering. At this stage, some level of pre-production prototype testing may have already occurred. I think kind of talked about that, and that actually might even be necessary based on the turbine design for for us to make a solid determination of whether or not this is a certifiable machine based on the loads provided. So deliverables, yeah, we kind of touched on these. This is more of the deliverable schedule, the duration schedule here. So the summary of work is due 1 month from the contract execution date. The design review is typically we attempt to schedule that 3 months from the execution date, but ahead of that, we do require the documentation, a draft presentation to be delivered to the NREL team to allow sufficient time for our internal review. We try to put together a really solid team, and everybody has different, different schedules, different deadlines. So we do ask that material is ready ahead of the design review meeting by several weeks to allow us time to review, come up with questions and feedback that can be addressed during the design review meeting. Then 6 months from contracts execution is the manufacturing tooling plan. 15 months is the report detailing the manufacturing of the turbine. We do ask for service manuals at that time as well. So you can see there's about a 12-month gap between a potential go decision to when we expect the turbine to be manufactured. And then 19 months from contract execution is the report detailing the installation, and we also require installation manuals at that time. And then finally, 21 months, which is the duration of the contract, is the final revised levelized cost of energy report. And then throughout the award, there are quarterly reports every 3 months. They are based on the subcontract execution date, so they don't necessarily follow the yearly quarters. We sometimes try, so we sometimes can, but that's not always the case. So keep that in mind, that it's not a yearly quarter. It's a quarterly based on your contract execution date. So we'll talk about the scoring criteria for this award type. The first criteria listed here is the technical approach and readiness. That accounts for 35% of the score, the proposal stage. And this is, again, it's going to require everything we kind of talked about for design review. We're going to want to see very detailed description of the system, loads tables that's consistent with standards requirements, description of the loads tables. We're going to want to know how those loads were achieved, whether it was through a validated aeroelastic model. That is considered sufficient. However, it's not the requirement. If there's another way, or you have a proprietary model, that is fine as well. We're just going to want to see all of the required documentation that lets us know that where we have confidence in those predictions. We also want to know some measure of performance and efficiency, whether that is through maybe some pre-prototype testing, or whether it's through physics-based analysis, or through an aeroelastic model. We want to see what the power output expectation will look like. And then the cost of energy figure of merit, which we touched on before. So the second criteria is the description of proposed manufacturing and the installation plan. That is 25% of the scoring. Again, this is going to be kind of the who, what, when, where for the manufacturing of the turbine, identifying any vendors, whether anything is going to be done in-house and what and how. We also want to see a list of any, a description of any plans to list or certify major components. This usually ends up on the power electronics side of things. If the prototype installation funding is being requested, then we'll also want a detailed description of where the turbine will be installed. Third criteria here is common across many of the award types, and this is the extent to which the system will impact the US market at 15%. So again, we want to see a sound development plan to ensure that the turbine can reach certification and or listing for the US market. We want to see some estimation of the percentage of US-based manufacturing for the turbine. That is an important factor here. Anything and everything domestic is always very important. We also want to understand how many installations will be installed in the US in the first year of certification or after listing. And again, these are estimates. Kind of have to look into the crystal ball and do your best, and we understand that. Also, the technical and financial capability to be able to see this award through completion is important. And then any documentation that verifies the company's financial status is another checklist item for us. Criteria number 4 is going to be your team. So we want a list of anybody that's going to be involved, even if it's people that are providing expertise or contractors. We want to see who's going to be assisting in the prototype manufacture and installation award. So the company's principal and recent experience or relevant experience in the DWT market is also a part of this criteria. And then just the general qualifications of anybody and everybody. We ask for resumes of key members. And we want to see that we want to see that there's some manufacturing experience, but if not, we need some background on experience or expertise that qualifies that team or team member for this proposed effort. Also, a track record is helpful for us. So, listing the ability to execute previous projects on time and budget is also a factor in scoring criteria number 4. And then funding, yep, this was touched on earlier in the week, but the maximum amount is $300,000. So this varies a little bit differently from some of the other award types, or depending on the turbine size, because it's all based on peak power. If its peak power is say 50 kilowatts, then at $3 per watt, you'd be looking at 150K, and then the 50K plus up there. So, but if you're 100 kilowatt design, then you're gonna cap out at the 300K mark. And then it's similar for the installation cost. That's just for manufacturing. So there is a distinction there. That's just for manufacturing. And then for installation, there's a maximum of 100,000, or again, there's the formula with the $1 per watt peak power. And it's whichever is less for both of those, manufacturing and installation. And here we're looking at a 50% price participation. And again, that's largely because there's an expectation of some major purchases, major equipment and component purchases, even though this award does help cover some of that. It's unlikely that it will cover all of it. So those types of items can go towards the price participation on this award type. Let's see where we're at. Oh yeah, and then recent example. There's only one because this has only been around since the last round of CIP, and so Pecos Wind Power is currently under a prototype manufacture and installation. And they are partnering with Renewable Concepts Incorporated for a lot of their domestic manufacturing. They'll also be installing at RCI's headquarters in Kansas. So they've done a really good job of leveraging this award type coming out of a prototype development award. So it was a really organic lead in for them.
Can NREL share a sample proposal document which got awarded in the past? Will help newcomers. Well, we don't even have those. They're all shredded. It's a question for Kendall Jackson. Are there, but I think it's a no. Those are pretty guarded. Gosh, it may be more, I don't have too many good ideas except for reaching out to some consultants that help people with proposals. And who would those be? Like Joe Sposey with RE Innovations or Heather Rhodes Weaver with eFormative Options. There are people that have helped clients with proposals. Oh, and Robert Preuss, who can be found as another consultant expressing this service. That may be a better path forward. I don't think there's a sample proposal available, Guru. But it's a good question for Kendall, just to make sure I'm not wrong. I think your best bet is to study the criteria and try to try to tailor a proposal to be scored per those criteria. And, that's going to be probably your best bet, because I don't think there's going to be a template provided by us. Yeah, and Joe agrees that if Heather Rose Weaver were here, she would be telling you to contact her. She helps people author proposals, and so does Robert Preuss now, because he was in our chair for a long time, but now he is retired and is acting as a consultant and is free and clear to participate in the proposal process now. But Joe Sposey says he doesn't typically author proposals like Heather Rhodes Weaver does with eFormative. Let's see if I can dig up anything else helpful here. So Guru, I'm going to put so here's contact for Robert. Let's see if I can get something good here from Heather. I think it's just eFormative Options. Yeah. Guru acknowledges the response. What area should we submit proposal? If we have a prototype which works, we have our generator design, blades, control systems. Should it span different area or only one category? Yeah, it's probably just not enough information to answer accurately. You have any opinion on that, or how to get the right, how to direct Guru to the right topic area, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I think, reaching out to us, we can provide a little bit of guidance, but we definitely can't, make a decision for you.
Right.
So the question here is, we have a prototype which works. We have our generator design, blades of trust.
So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll give an idea. Like, let's say we have a generator, but like we are not using anything in the market because we have basically a contra-rotating generator, which basically allows you a lower torque startup. So let's say the wind speed is like startup wind speed is like 8 meters per second for any windmill. But at that same windmill, if we use a contra-rotating generator, at that time, the initial torque required to start the wind turbine is lower because you are using two contra-rotating propellers. So basically, one turns other way. So it basically reduces the startup for the generator. So it can kick in instead of 8 meters per second, it can kick in at 4 meters per second and start producing the power. So we don't know whether there is a specific generator available in the market. So we come up with our own idea or a design. And for that reason, I was asking whether we fall into a prototype development or like a design or something, or R&D or something. So in short, there are multiple areas. We are not even using the traditional 3-blade wind turbine blades because in our design, we don't need those. We have a different design. And for that reason, the blades are also changed. The generator is also changed. The control system, which is basically yaw and everything, sort of like changed. So there are multiple areas or multiple components which doesn't fit into the existing industry standards. So for that reason, I'm asking where should we be submitting this kind of proposal? We have like a prototype, but then if we want to go into a production or again do a prototype design proposal or what? That's the question.
Well, so for prototype testing, which we'll talk a little bit more about next, really the expectation is that the whole system is ready to test, and you're not trying to optimize a single component or optimize the whole system. The assumption is sort of that those things have largely been done, maybe not completely, but they've largely been done. And prototype testing would be to address, key design questions or issues that really can only be answered through, testing the full prototype design, the full system. So if you've got, if the generator needs optimization, or the generator and blades as a system needs optimization, there are other topic areas that are probably more applicable.
Yeah, so the question arises is like, should we be like extending that kind of proposal for multi-year, or we can do the same work in same year? So let's say I submit for a generator design optimization, I also submit for a blade optimization, and I also submit for prototype uh, development or something. So can this be considered in a single year, or like, because they conflicts with each other? Like I am not submitting just like a generator optimization or design proposal. I have a 3, 4 different areas, and if I submit that, then NRL says, oh, you don't know what exactly you are trying to do, so we are not gonna entertain you at all. So that's my point. Like, where do we fit in this? Because most of the companies, they may have only a blade design improvement. Someone may have maybe what inverter improvement or something. But we have 3, 4 different things which we are like kind of improvising, because it's like a little radical or different design. And in that case, based on NRL's experience or whatever the knowledge they have, they say, oh, well, this is not good, or you don't know what you are trying to do, or you are going in a wrong direction. So we don't have any feedback on that kind of scenario also, because we keep submitting and then we don't get a response. So we are like kind of hanging, like what's the issue? Because we see something is working, but NRL is not believing. Like whoever reviews, the person may think, oh, this is not possible because the existing law says this. But then there is something which they might have missed or something. So we need kind of like a feedback on those things. Like, okay, we submitted last time, but why it wasn't like considered, or it's like a rubbish idea or something, or economically it doesn't make a sense or something like that. Because we don't have anybody to go and look for or like ask for, because NREL goes to thousands of designs and proposals and all those things. So we look at you as like a checkpoint. Okay, do it or not do it. And if it no, then why no? Or if yes, then why yes? Something like that sort of thing. And the other question comes in, like, what if we are willing to spend money for testing or something? So would NRL entertain that kind of proposal? You don't give us money, but like take our windmill and just have a reference. So when we try to sell our wind, are you certified or something? Well, it takes 2 years or something to get the certification, but by that time we miss the critical timeline in the market or something. We can generate the kind of funding from private investors and get it started. So investor will obviously invest as a risk, but still we are using that time to get the product into the market and get it there. So there is at least something to say, hey, okay, and NREL is like doing the testing, and it will be available maybe after 2 years or something. And in this case, we are not asking you for money. The company can spend money for the testing. So that's my question. Like, in case if you don't believe that windmill design, but we do believe and we are willing to spend money on that front, so would NRL consider this kind of proposal?
Okay, so there was a lot covered there. So let me try to back it up a little bit. You mentioned there are difficulties with knowing which topic area to apply for, or if there's you feel like you're going to be penalized for applying to more than one. So I would say really just carefully read the statement of work that's associated for each topic area and see which one fits best. There is not, yes, we have made the comment that if you're just applying to multiple topic areas, then it might appear that you don't know where you're at in your turbine development. But that's really in the case where we see the same type of proposal. I mean, basically the same proposal submitted to multiple topic areas. If your proposal is crafted for that topic area, then there's not going to be, a penalty for that proposal. We don't score proposals against each other. They are scored based on their own merit. So that is something that I want to make pretty clear here at this point. I'm still a little confused about, where you're at with your design. So it's a little hard for me to give any guidance on what area is best, but maybe it is that more than one topic area is best. And then you have made a comment about partnering with NREL, or paying for work to be done at NREL. Is that what you were asking? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, yes, NREL is open for business.
My point is like for now we are submitting in hope of like getting funding, but let's say we get a funding from private investors saying that, hey, NREL will validate this design, so we need money for that. Then the investors say, oh, okay, if NREL is there, I can pay you money. Otherwise, nobody is gonna say us. So it doesn't matter whether design fails or succeeds. They don't care about it. But as long as NREL is working on that, the people will be ready to put money. And in case if we don't get funding from you, we can generate a funding or raise money and get it tested. So we don't waste or like miss the time period like which we want to like utilize for commercialization. So like let's say last time we submitted, but our proposal didn't get accepted for some reason. But what we are saying is like, okay, if you don't believe, that's okay. But this is our design, which NREL may think it's not economical or any other reason. But we say, okay, we come up with money and let's do work together, certify it. So people start believing in it in some reason that at least NREL is concerned. Otherwise, wind industry is like already so much, like so many false claims has been done. So nobody believes in that. They say, oh, no, it's crap because nothing has been done. No validity or no verification is done. So it's kind of a chicken egg problem for customers. Oh, will it work or not? Or what? So it gives a little bit credibility for a customer saying that, okay, it's under testing. Maybe the testing results will come after a year or so. But in that period, we get a serious investors who can put money because some agency, a credible agency is behind it and testing it.
Yeah, well, NREL, we do, partner with industry often, and entities of all different sizes. We are, yes, we are open for business. It really does depend on the scope of work, on what you're looking to do, also contract value. But we do have contract mechanisms in place to work with outside companies. Absolutely. So it just really depends on what you're looking to do. And then we would have to make an assessment on, if that's something that NREL is in a good position to help with, or if, we need to defer to the private sector for those types of services. It really just depends until we have a more thorough discussion about what you're looking to accomplish.